The clock on the wall showed 2:47 in the morning when the automatic doors of City General Hospital slid open with a quiet whoosh. Most nights, this was the quietest time in the emergency room. The rush of evening accidents had died down, and the morning shift was still hours away. But tonight was different. Rebecca Chen looked up from her paperwork at the nurses' station. She had been working nights at this hospital for 8 long years, and in all that time, she thought she had seen everything. Broken bones from late night, fights, overdoses from the downtown area, elderly patients who couldn't sleep through chest pains. But the man who slowly walked through those doors made her pause. He wasn't rushing like most people who came to the emergency room. He wasn't holding his side in pain or crying for help. Instead, he moved carefully like each step hurt. His clothes were dirty and torn in several places. His hair was long and messy, and his beard looked like it hadn't been trimmed in months. He carried a small backpack that looked like it had seen better days, holding it close to his chest like it contained everything he owned. Rebecca noticed something else too. On his left arm, barely visible through the dirt and wear, was a tattoo. It was faded, but she could still make it out. The eagle, globe, and anchor symbol that every Marine carries with pride. This wasn't just any homeless person. This was a veteran. The man found a plastic chair in the corner of the waiting room, far away from the few other patients who were there. He sat down slowly, wincing as he did. Rebecca watched him for a moment. She had seen this before. People who were hurting but didn't know how to ask for help, especially veterans who had been taught to be strong and never show weakness. 3 hours passed. Other patients came and went. A teenager with a broken wrist from skateboarding. An elderly woman with breathing problems. A construction worker who had cut his hand. But the veteran just sat there, quiet and still. He didn't approach the desk. He didn't fill out any forms, he just waited. Around 6 in the morning, Rebecca couldn't ignore it anymore. Her shift was almost over, but she couldn't leave without checking on him. She grabbed a clipboard and walked over to his corner. "Good morning," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. "I'm Rebecca, one of the nurses here. I noticed you've been waiting for a while. Can I help you with something?" The man looked up at her with tired eyes. They were the kind of eyes that had seen too much, the 1,000-yard stare that combat veterans sometimes carry. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, he spoke. "My feet," he said simply. "They hurt real bad. Been walking for days and I think something's wrong." Rebecca knelt down beside his chair. "What's your name?" "Tommy," he replied. "Tommy Rodriguez. I used to be a Marine." "Thank you for your service, Tommy," Rebecca said, and she meant it. "Let's take a look at those feet, okay?" When Tommy slowly removed his worn-out boots, Rebecca had to take a deep breath. His feet were in terrible condition. There were open wounds that looked infected, blisters that had burst and never healed properly, and his socks were more holes than fabric. The smell told her that this had been going on for weeks, maybe longer. "Tommy, these need immediate attention," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "When was the last time you had a hot meal or a shower?" Tommy looked down at his hands. "Maybe a week ago. There's a soup kitchen downtown, but they're only open twice a week." Rebecca felt her heart break a little. Here was a man who had served his country, probably seen combat, and now he was living on the streets with infected wounds, too proud or too scared to ask for help. What happened next would change both their lives forever. Rebecca looked around the emergency room. Dr. Patterson was busy with another patient, and the other nurses were handling their own cases. She made a decision that went against every rule in the hospital handbook. "Tommy, I'm going to take you to one of our treatment rooms and clean up those wounds properly. Then I want you to tell me when you last had a real meal." She helped him to a small room down the hall. For the next hour, she carefully cleaned and bandaged his feet. The infection was worse than she had first thought, but with proper treatment, it would heal. As she worked, Tommy began to talk. He told her about his 2 tours in Afghanistan, how he had been a good soldier, had friends who didn't make it home, how he came back different, with nightmares that wouldn't go away and jumpiness that made it hard to hold down a job. How his wife left him when the drinking started, taking their kids with her. How he lost his apartment, then his car, then everything else. "I know I should have come here sooner," Tommy said as Rebecca finished wrapping his feet in clean white bandages. "But I didn't want to be a burden. There are people with real emergencies." "Tommy," Rebecca said firmly, "this is a real emergency. You're a real emergency, and you're not a burden." When she was done with his feet, Rebecca did something else that was against the rules. She left him in the treatment room and walked to the hospital cafeteria. With her own money, she bought a hot breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, orange juice, and coffee. Real food, not the packaged sandwiches from the vending machine. Tommy's eyes filled with tears when she brought the tray back. "I can't pay you for this," he said. "You don't need to," Rebecca replied. "You already paid. You paid when you served our country." While Tommy ate, Rebecca made another decision that broke hospital policy. The staff shower room was supposed to be for employees only, but she couldn't let him leave in those dirty clothes. She found a set of clean scrubs that would fit him and showed him where he could clean up. "Take as long as you need," she told him. "I'll be right outside if you need anything." 40 minutes later, Tommy emerged looking like a different person. The shower had washed away weeks of street life. The clean scrubs made him look dignified. Again. But more than that, there was something different in his eyes. Hope, maybe. Or just the simple relief of being treated like a human being. "Ma'am," he said to Rebecca, "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me, Tommy. Just promise me you'll take care of those feet. Change the bandages every day. If you can't get supplies, you come back here." Tommy nodded, but then he reached into his old backpack. He pulled out a crumpled piece of paper and pressed it into Rebecca's hand. "If something happens to me," he said, "this is my emergency contact. Haven't talked to her in 3 years, but she's all the family I got left." Rebecca looked at the paper. In faded ink it said, "Emergency contact. General Patricia Williams, U.S. Army." There was a phone number underneath. Rebecca assumed it was old information, maybe from before Tommy's troubles started. People sometimes kept outdated emergency contacts, especially when they were struggling with mental health issues. She folded the paper and put it in her pocket. "Take care of yourself, Tommy," she said as he prepared to leave. "You too, ma'am, and thank you for everything." Tommy walked out of the hospital just as the morning shift was arriving. Rebecca watched him go, hoping she had made some small difference in his life. She had no idea that in just a few hours her own life was about to change completely. What Rebecca didn't know was that someone had been watching. The hospital had security cameras in every hallway, and hospital administrator Michael Foster made it his business to review the footage regularly. He had noticed Rebecca's unauthorized activities on the night shift recording. At 8 a.m., just as Rebecca was getting ready to go home after her 12-hour shift, she was called to Administrator Foster's office. She had never been called there before, and a cold feeling settled in her stomach as she walked down the administrative hallway. Foster was a man in his 50s who wore expensive suits and seemed to care more about the hospital's budget than its patients. He was sitting behind his large desk with a serious expression when Rebecca knocked on his open door. "Come in and close the door behind you," he said without looking up from some paperwork. Rebecca sat down in the chair across from his desk, her heart beating faster. "I've been reviewing security footage from last night," Foster began, finally looking at her. "I saw some very concerning behavior." He turned his computer monitor so she could see it. There she was on the grainy security video, helping Tommy to the treatment room, bringing him food, showing him to the staff shower. "Can you explain to me why you violated multiple hospital policies in one night?" Foster asked. Rebecca took a deep breath. "I helped a veteran who needed medical attention. You used hospital resources without authorization. You allowed a non-employee to use staff facilities. You spent over an hour providing services that weren't properly documented or billed. Do you understand how serious this is?" "Mr. Foster, that man served our country. He had infected wounds and hadn't eaten in days. I couldn't just ignore that." Foster held up his hand to stop her. What you could or couldn't do isn't the point. The point is that you broke the rules. Multiple rules, and that puts this hospital at risk. Rebecca felt her world starting to crumble. What are you saying? I'm saying you're suspended without pay, effective immediately, pending a full investigation into your conduct. The words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Suspended without pay. She was a single mother with 2 young children. She couldn't afford to lose even 1 week's paycheck, let alone face the possibility of being fired. For how long? She managed to ask. That depends on the investigation. Could be a week. Could be permanent. Rebecca left the hospital that morning feeling like her life was falling apart. She had dedicated 8 years to helping people, and now she was being punished for showing basic human compassion. The drive home was a blur of tears and worry about how she would explain this to her children, how she would pay the bills, whether her nursing career was over. She had no idea that the crumpled piece of paper in her pocket was about to change everything. Rebecca sat in her car in the hospital parking lot for 20 minutes before she could even start the engine. Her hands were shaking and she couldn't stop the tears from coming. Suspended without pay. The words kept echoing in her head like a bad song that wouldn't go away. She thought about her 2 kids at home. 8-year-old Maya was probably getting ready for school, and little David, who was only 5, would be asking where Mommy was. How could she explain this to them? How could she tell them that Mommy might lose her job because she helped someone who needed help? The drive home felt like the longest 20 minutes of her life. Every red light gave her more time to think about what this meant. The rent was due in 2 weeks. The car payment was next week. And now she had no income coming in. Maybe for weeks, maybe forever. When she finally walked through her front door, Maya was eating cereal at the kitchen table, her school backpack already packed and ready by the door. David was playing with his toy cars on the living room floor, making quiet vrooming sounds. "Mommy!" David jumped up and ran to hug her legs. "You're home early." Rebecca forced a smile and picked him up. "Yes, baby. Mommy finished work early today." Maya looked up from her cereal with the serious expression she sometimes wore when she was trying to figure out if something was wrong. At 8 years old, she was already too smart for her own good. "Are you okay, Mom? You look sad." Rebecca sat down, at the table next to her daughter. "I'm just tired, sweetheart. It was a long night at work." But Maya wasn't fooled that easily. She had learned to read her mother's moods over the years, especially since it had just been the 3 of them for so long. After dropping the kids off at school and daycare, Rebecca came back home to an empty house that felt bigger and quieter than usual. She sat on her couch and tried to figure out what to do next. Should she call her supervisor? Should she look for another job right away? Should she call a lawyer? The phone rang around noon. It was her friend Lisa, who worked the day shift at the hospital. "Rebecca, oh my God, what happened? Everyone's talking about you being suspended. Is it true?" Rebecca sighed. "Yeah, it's true." "But why? What did you do?" Rebecca explained the whole story about Tommy, about helping him, about breaking the rules. When she finished, there was silence on the other end of the phone. "That's it?" Lisa finally said. "You helped a homeless veteran and they suspended you for it?" "I broke multiple hospital policies, Lisa. Used unauthorized resources. Let a non-employee use staff facilities. Didn't follow proper documentation procedures." "That's such garbage," Lisa said, and Rebecca could hear the anger in her voice. The staff breaks little rules every day. Remember when Dr. Peterson let his nephew use the staff cafeteria last month? Remember when Nurse Johnson took home supplies for her elderly mother? Nobody got suspended for that. Lisa was right, and Rebecca knew it. There seemed to be different rules for different people, and apparently helping a veteran wasn't important enough to deserve any flexibility. Over the next few days, Rebecca learned just how divided the hospital staff was about her situation. Some people, like Lisa, thought the suspension was completely unfair. They quietly called her to offer support and tell her they were on her side. But others weren't so supportive. When Rebecca went to the hospital to clean out her locker, she overheard 2 nurses talking in the break room. "I mean, I feel bad for homeless people too," one was saying. But you can't just ignore the rules. What if everyone started doing whatever they wanted? Exactly, the other replied. She brought this on herself. There are proper channels for helping people. She should have followed them. Rebecca hurried past without saying anything, but their words stung. Maybe they were right. Maybe she had been foolish to think that helping someone was more important than following procedures. The worst part was the money situation. By the end of the first week, Rebecca was already feeling the pinch. She had some savings, but not much. Single mothers don't usually have the luxury of emergency funds. Every dollar went to rent, groceries, daycare, car payments, and the 100 other expenses that came with raising 2 kids alone. She applied for unemployment benefits, but that process would take weeks. She started looking at job listings online, but most nursing positions required references from previous employers. How could she explain why she'd left her last job? Maya noticed the change first. Kids always do. "Mom, how come we're eating peanut butter sandwiches again?" she asked on Thursday night. "We had them yesterday too." Rebecca looked at the simple dinner she had made and felt a stab of guilt. Peanut butter sandwiches, apple slices, and milk. It was nutritious enough, but it wasn't the kind of varied meals she usually tried to provide. "Sometimes it's fun to have simple dinners," she said, trying to sound cheerful. But Maya wasn't buying it. "Are we poor now, Mom?" The question hit Rebecca like a punch to the stomach. "No, sweetie. We're not poor. We're just being careful with our money right now." That night, after both kids were asleep, Rebecca sat at her kitchen table with a calculator and a pile of bills. No matter how she tried to make the numbers work, they didn't add up. If the suspension lasted more than 2 weeks, she would have to make some serious decisions about what bills to pay and what bills to let slide. She thought about calling her parents, but they were retired and living on a fixed income. They had helped her so much already when she was going through nursing school as a single mom. She couldn't ask them for more. Then something unexpected happened that changed everything. On Friday morning, Rebecca's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something made her answer it anyway. "Hello? Is this Rebecca Chen?" The voice was professional, formal. "Yes, this is Rebecca. Ms. Chen, this is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. I understand you were recently suspended from City General Hospital for helping a homeless veteran. Is that correct?" Rebecca's heart started beating faster. "How did you know about that?" "Someone at the hospital contacted us. They felt your story needed to be told. Would you be willing to speak with us?" Rebecca hesitated. Talking to the news seemed like a big step, one that might make things worse instead of better. "I don't know," she said. "I'm not sure that's a good idea." "Ms. Chen, can I tell you why I think this story is important?" Jennifer asked. "We're living in a time when people are losing faith in healthcare systems, when veterans are struggling to get the help they need, when basic human compassion seems to be disappearing. Your story shows that there are still people who care more about helping others than protecting themselves." Rebecca thought about it for a moment. Maybe it would help. Maybe if people knew what really happened, it would make a difference. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll talk to you." The interview aired on Friday evening. Rebecca watched it with her kids, who were excited to see their mom on television. The story was titled, "Nurse Suspended for Showing Compassion to Homeless Veteran, Jennifer." Walsh had done a good job telling the story fairly. She explained how Rebecca had helped Tommy, how she had been suspended for breaking hospital policies, and how the situation raised questions about what healthcare workers should do when policies conflict with basic human decency. The response was immediate and overwhelming. By Saturday morning, Rebecca's phone was ringing constantly. Some calls were from other news stations wanting to interview her. Some were from people offering support and encouragement. A few were from people criticizing her for breaking the rules. But the most surprising calls came from other healthcare workers sharing their own stories. "I'm a nurse in Denver," one caller said. "The same thing happened to me last year when I helped a homeless woman. I was written up but not suspended. Your story gives me courage to speak up about it." "I'm an EMT in Chicago," said another. "We see this all the time. People punished for showing basic human kindness. Something needs to change." The story started spreading on social media. Justice for Rebecca began trending on Twitter. People shared their own experiences with healthcare workers who had gone above and beyond to help them or their families. But the attention wasn't all positive. Hospital Administrator Foster called Rebecca on Saturday afternoon, and he was not happy. "Ms. Chen, I'm very disappointed that you chose to take this matter to the media," he said in a cold voice. "This kind of publicity is not good for the hospital." "Mr. Foster, I just told the truth about what happened. You've made this hospital look bad. You've made it seem like we don't care about veterans or homeless people. That's not fair." "Then maybe you should think about why it looks that way," Rebecca said, surprising herself with her boldness. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Foster said, "I want you to know that this media attention isn't going to help your case. If anything, it makes things worse." After he hung up, Rebecca wondered if she had made a mistake. Maybe talking to the news had hurt her chances of getting her job back. Maybe she should have just quietly accepted the suspension and hoped for the best. But it was too late now. The story was out there and people were talking about it. Some were supportive, some were critical, but everyone had an opinion about whether a nurse should be punished for helping a homeless veteran. Rebecca spent the weekend reading comments online and listening to voicemails from strangers. The support was encouraging, but it didn't pay the bills. It didn't solve her immediate problem of being out of work with 2 kids to support. Sunday night, as she was putting David to bed, he asked her a question that broke her heart. "Mommy, when are you going back to work? I miss when you used to tell us stories about helping sick people." Rebecca tucked him in and kissed his forehead. "I don't know yet, baby, but Mommy's going to figure it out, okay?" As she turned off his bedroom light, Rebecca realized that this whole situation had become bigger than just her job. It had become about something more important, about what kind of society we want to live in, about whether we value rules more than compassion, about whether helping others should ever be considered wrong. She had no idea that the crumpled piece of paper in her pocket, the one Tommy had given her with his emergency contact information, was about to turn her world upside down again. Because on Monday morning, someone very important was going to walk through the doors of City General Hospital, and nothing would ever be the same. Monday morning started like any other day at City General Hospital. The night shift was finishing up their paperwork, the day shift was grabbing coffee and checking their patient assignments, and Administrator Foster was in his office reviewing the weekend's incident reports. But at exactly 9:15 a.m., everything changed. A long black car with government license plates pulled up to the hospital's main entrance. The morning security guard, Officer Williams, noticed it immediately, because cars like that didn't usually come to their hospital. This wasn't the kind of place where important government officials normally showed up. The driver got out first, a young man in a crisp military uniform. He walked around to the passenger side and opened the door. Out stepped a woman who commanded attention without saying a word. She was tall and walked with perfect posture, like someone who had spent years in the military. Her uniform was covered with ribbons and medals, but what really caught everyone's attention were the 4 silver stars on her shoulders. This was a general, and not just any general. This was one of the highest-ranking female officers in the entire United States Army. General Patricia Williams looked at the hospital building for a moment, then turned to her aide. "Lieutenant Johnson, I want you to wait here with the car. This shouldn't take long." "Yes, ma'am. Should I call ahead to let them know you're coming?" The general shook her head. "No. I want to see how they handle unexpected visitors." She walked through the hospital's automatic doors with the kind of confidence that comes from decades of leadership. The waiting room fell silent as people noticed her uniform and the stars on her shoulders. Even the children stopped playing and stared. At the information desk, a young volunteer named Kevin was helping an elderly man find the cardiology department. When he saw the general approaching, he quickly finished giving directions and turned to her. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you?" "I need to speak with whoever is in charge of nursing staff disciplinary actions," General Williams said in a clear, authoritative voice. Kevin blinked. He had never been asked that question before. That would probably be our hospital administrator, Mr. Foster. But he's usually very busy. Do you have an appointment?" The general looked at Kevin's name tag, then back at his face. Kevin, I'm General Patricia Williams, United States Army. I don't make appointments for matters of urgency. Please call Mr. Foster and tell him I'm here to discuss the suspension of Nurse Rebecca Chen. The color drained from Kevin's face. He had heard about the nurse who got suspended for helping a homeless veteran. Everyone in the hospital had been talking about it. But how did this general know about it? Yes, ma'am. Right away, ma'am. Kevin picked up the phone with shaking hands and dialed Foster's extension. Mr. Foster? There's a general here to see you. A real general, with stars and everything. She says she wants to talk about Nurse Chen. Yes, sir, the one who got suspended. I don't know, sir. She just said it was urgent. Okay, I'll tell her. Kevin hung up and looked at the general. He'll be right down, ma'am. Thank you, Kevin. General Williams stood in the lobby, and it was like she created her own gravity field. People couldn't help but look at her. Nurses, walking by, would slow down and stare. Doctors coming off their shifts would whisper to each other. Everyone wanted to know who she was and why she was there. 5 minutes later, Administrator Foster came hurrying down the hallway toward the lobby. He was straightening his tie and trying to look composed, but it was obvious he was nervous. Foster was used to being the most important person in the hospital, but he had never dealt with a 4-star general before. General Williams, he said, extending his hand. I'm Michael Foster, the hospital administrator. It's an honor to meet you. The general shook his hand firmly. Mr. Foster, I understand you recently suspended a nurse named Rebecca Chen for helping a homeless veteran. Is that correct? Foster's smile faltered. Well, yes, but it's not quite that simple. She violated several hospital policies and… Is there somewhere private we can discuss this? General Williams interrupted. I don't think you want to have this conversation in your lobby. Foster looked around and realized that everyone in the waiting area was listening to their conversation. Of course, please follow me to my office. As they walked down the hallway, Foster tried to make small talk. So, General, are you here in an official capacity or… Mr. Foster, the general said without breaking stride, let's wait until we're in your office. Foster's office was on the 3rd floor, and the walk there felt like the longest few minutes of his life. When they reached his door, he quickly ushered the general inside and closed it behind them. Please, have a seat, Foster said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. General Williams sat down, but she didn't relax. She sat with perfect military posture, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes focused directly on Foster. Now then, Foster began, settling into his own chair. How can I help you, General? You can start by explaining to me why you suspended a nurse for helping my brother. The words hit Foster like a physical blow. He stared at the general, trying to process what she had just said. Your brother? Tommy Rodriguez is my younger brother, Mr. Foster. He served 2 tours in Afghanistan as a Marine. He's been struggling with PTSD for the past 3 years, and I've been trying to find him for months. Foster's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. General Williams continued. Tommy called me last week for the first time in over a year. Do you know what he told me? He told me about a nurse at this hospital who treated him like a human being, who didn't just see a homeless person to be processed and moved along, but saw a veteran who needed help. General, I had no idea. Of course you didn't. Because you didn't bother to find out who he was or what his story might be. You just saw a violation of your precious policies. Foster was sweating now. This was not how he had imagined his Monday morning going. General Williams, please understand. We have policies for a reason. If we let every employee break the rules, whenever they feel like it… Mr. Foster, the general said, her voice getting quieter but somehow more intimidating. Let me tell you something about my brother. He earned a Purple Heart in Afghanistan. He saved 3 of his fellow Marines when their convoy was attacked. He came home with shrapnel in his leg and invisible wounds in his mind that have been tearing him apart ever since. Foster shifted uncomfortably, in his chair. Tommy has been too proud and too ashamed to ask for help, even from his own family. But that nurse, Rebecca Chen, She saw past his appearance and his circumstances. She saw a human being who deserved dignity and care. I understand that, General, but we have to follow procedures. Do you? General Williams stood up from her chair. Do you really? Because I did some research before I came here, Mr. Foster. I found out that this hospital has received over $2 million in federal funding, specifically designated for veteran care programs, money that was supposed to be used to help people exactly like my brother. Foster's face went pale. I also found out that your hospital has never actually implemented any of those programs. The money has been sitting in your budget for 3 years, being used for other purposes. Would you like to explain that to me? General, those programs are complicated to set up. There are regulatory requirements, staffing issues. There are excuses, Mr. Foster. That's what there are. The general began pacing back and forth in front of Foster's desk. So let me see if I understand this correctly. You took federal money meant to help veterans, but you never actually helped any veterans. And when one of your nurses did help a veteran using her own time and her own money, you suspended her for it. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. General Williams stopped pacing and looked directly at Foster. You punished someone for doing what you were supposed to be doing all along. Foster tried to regain some control of the conversation. General, I appreciate your concern, but internal hospital disciplinary matters are really not what, Mr. Foster? Not my business? Let me tell you what my business is. My business is making sure that veterans get the care and respect they deserve. My business is making sure that federal money allocated for veteran services actually gets used for veteran services. And my business is making sure that people who help veterans don't get punished for it. The general sat back down, but her posture remained intimidating. Now I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want honest answers. First question, how long has Rebecca Chen been suspended? About a week, Foster admitted. Second question, what was her employment record like before this incident? Foster glanced at his computer screen. She had an excellent record. 8 years with no disciplinary actions. Consistently high performance reviews. Received a commendation last year for going above and beyond during a flu outbreak. Third question. Have you ever suspended anyone for helping patients in ways that weren't strictly by the book? Foster hesitated. Not exactly, but that's a no then. Fourth question. Why did you really suspend her? I told you she violated multiple policies. Mr. Foster, I've been in leadership positions for 30 years. I can tell when someone is hiding behind rules because they don't want to admit the real reason for their actions. So I'm going to ask you again, why did you really suspend her? Foster was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was much smaller than before. Because it looked bad. Having homeless people in the hospital, using our facilities. It's not the image we want to project. There it is, General Williams said. The truth. You suspended a good nurse with an excellent record because you were worried about your hospital's image. Foster looked down at his desk. It's not just about image. It's about liability. About setting precedents. It's about cowardice, Mr. Foster. It's about choosing the easy path instead of the right path. The general stood up again. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to call Nurse Chen and tell her that her suspension is lifted immediately. You're going to give her a formal apology. And you're going to implement those veteran services, programs that you've been sitting on for 3 years. General, I don't think you understand the complexity of, and if you don't do those things, Mr. Foster, I'm going to make some phone calls. Calls to the people who allocated that federal funding. Calls to the media outlets that have been covering this story. Calls to my colleagues in Congress who sit on veteran affairs committees. Foster was completely pale now. You can't threaten me like this. I'm not threatening you, Mr. Foster. I'm informing you of the consequences of your actions. You have a choice to make. You can do the right thing voluntarily, or you can do the right thing after I've made your life very difficult. Either way, you're going to do the right thing. The general walked to the door, then turned back. Oh, and Mr. Foster, I want you to personally call Nurse Chen within the next hour. Not some assistant, not some HR person. You. And I want you to explain to her exactly why you're lifting her suspension. Foster nodded weakly. One more thing, General Williams added. I'm going to be checking on this situation regularly. If I find out that you've retaliated against Nurse Chen in any way, or if those veteran programs aren't implemented within 90 days, you'll be hearing from me again. She opened the door and walked out, leaving Foster sitting alone in his office, staring at the phone on his desk and wondering how his Monday had gone so completely wrong. Rebecca was sitting at her kitchen table, staring at a pile of unpaid bills when her phone rang. It was 10:30 on Monday morning, and she was trying to figure out which bills she could pay late without getting her utilities shut off. The caller, ID showed City General Hospital, and her heart sank. Was this Foster calling to tell her that her suspension was now permanent? She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up on the fourth ring. Hello? Ms. Chen? This is Michael Foster from the hospital. His voice sounded different than it had the week before. Smaller somehow. Less confident. Yes, Mr. Foster? I'm calling to inform you that your suspension has been lifted, effective immediately. I would also like to formally apologize for the way this situation was handled. Rebecca almost dropped the phone. I'm sorry, what? Your suspension is over. You can return to work tonight if you'd like, and I want to apologize. The hospital administration made an error in judgment regarding your actions last week. Rebecca sat there in stunned silence. This was not what she had expected to hear. Ms. Chen? Are you there? Yes, I'm here. I don't understand. What changed? Foster cleared his throat. We've had some time to review the situation more carefully. Your actions, while not strictly following protocol, were motivated by compassion and resulted in positive patient care. The hospital recognizes that sometimes the spirit of helping people is more important than rigid adherence to policies. Those didn't sound like Foster's words. Rebecca had never heard him talk about compassion or the spirit of helping people. Something had definitely happened. Mr. Foster, can I ask what brought about this change of heart? There was a long pause. Let's just say that someone helped us see the situation from a different perspective. Someone who made us realize that we may have lost sight of what's really important in healthcare. I see. Rebecca was still trying to process what was happening. And there won't be any disciplinary action on my record? No disciplinary action. In fact, we'd like to discuss a new position with you when you come in. Something that might be a better fit for your particular talents and interests. After Foster hung up, Rebecca sat there holding the phone, wondering if she had just imagined the entire conversation. Her suspension was lifted. Foster had apologized. They wanted to offer her a new position. She was still trying to make sense of it all when someone knocked on her front door. Rebecca looked through the peephole and saw a woman in a military uniform, standing on her porch. Her heart started beating faster. What was happening now? She opened the door cautiously. Can I help you? Are you Rebecca Chen? The woman asked. Yes. I'm General Patricia Williams, United States Army. I believe you helped my brother last week. Tommy Rodriguez? Rebecca's mouth fell open. The emergency contact number that Tommy had given her. The piece of paper that was still in her jacket pocket. This was his sister? This was a real general? Your brother? Tommy is your brother? He is. May I come in? I'd like to talk with you. Rebecca stepped aside and let the general into her living room. Even in civilian surroundings, General Williams had a presence that filled the room. Please sit down, Rebecca said, gesturing to her couch. I'm sorry, I'm just shocked. Tommy gave me your contact information, but I didn't realize that he actually had a sister who was a general. Patricia smiled for the first time since Rebecca had met her. I don't blame you for being skeptical. Tommy and I haven't been in touch for a long time. Is he okay? I've been worried about him since that night. He's doing much better thanks to you. He's staying with me now, and we're getting him the help he needs. Medical care, counseling, assistance with veteran benefits he should have been receiving all along. Rebecca felt tears starting in her eyes. I'm so glad. I was afraid I'd never know what happened to him. General Williams leaned forward. Rebecca, can I ask you something? When you helped Tommy that night, did you know who he was? Did you know he had family who might be able to help him? No, I had no idea. He was just a veteran who needed help. That's all that mattered to me. That's what I thought. That's what makes what you did so special. The general stood up and walked to Rebecca's window, looking out at the street. Tommy told me everything you did for him that night. How you treated his wounds, bought him food with your own money, let him use the shower, gave him clean clothes. But most importantly, how you treated him with dignity and respect. Rebecca wiped her eyes. Anyone would have done the same thing. No, Rebecca. That's where you're wrong. Most people wouldn't have done what you did. And that's exactly the problem. General, Williams turned back to face her. I spent this morning at your hospital having a very serious conversation with Mr. Foster about why good people get punished for doing good things. You went to the hospital? Is that why Foster called me? Foster called you because I made it very clear that suspending you was not just wrong. It was unacceptable. I also made it clear that there would be consequences if he didn't fix this situation immediately. Rebecca shook her head in amazement. I can't believe this is really happening. Believe it. But that's not the only reason I'm here. The general sat back down. I have a proposition for you. What kind of proposition? The hospital received federal funding 3 years ago to create veteran outreach programs that were supposed to help people exactly like Tommy, but those programs were never implemented. The money just sat there, unused. Rebecca nodded. That doesn't surprise me, unfortunately. Well, that's about to change. Foster has agreed to finally implement those programs, and he's going to need someone to run them. Someone who understands both healthcare and the needs of veterans. Someone who has already proven that they're willing to put helping people ahead of bureaucratic convenience. You want me to run the veteran programs? I want you to consider it. It would be a new position with better pay and more responsibility. You'd be developing and managing services specifically designed to help veterans who are struggling, people like Tommy who fall through the cracks of the system. Rebecca felt overwhelmed. Just an hour ago, she had been worried about paying her bills and wondering if her nursing career was over. Now she was being offered a promotion and the chance to make a real difference for veterans. I don't know what to say. You don't have to decide right now, think about it. But I hope you'll say yes. Because what happened with Tommy shouldn't be unusual. It should be normal. Every veteran who needs help should be able to find someone. Like you. There was another knock at the door. Rebecca looked through the peephole again and gasped. It was Tommy, but he looked completely different from the man she had met in the hospital. He was clean-shaven, wearing new clothes and standing up straight. He looked like the Marine he had once been. Rebecca opened the door and Tommy smiled at her. Hello, ma'am. I wanted to thank you properly for what you did for me. Tommy. You. Look wonderful. How are you feeling? Better than I have in years, thanks to you and my sister. She's been taking good care of me. Rebecca invited Tommy in, and he sat down next to his sister on the couch. The family resemblance was obvious now. They had the same eyes, the same determined jawline. Tommy's been staying with me while we get him back on his feet, Patricia explained. He's started counseling for his PTSD, and we're working on getting him into a transitional housing program specifically for veterans. That's wonderful, Rebecca said. I'm so happy for you. Tommy looked down at his hands. Ma'am, I need you to know that what you did for me that night, it saved my life. Not just medically, but in every way that matters. For 3 years, I felt like I was invisible, like I didn't matter to anyone. You made me feel human again. Rebecca felt the tears coming back. Tommy, you always mattered. You always deserved help and respect. I know that now, but I had forgotten it until you showed me. Patricia put her hand on her brother's shoulder. Tommy has agreed to help with the new veteran programs at the hospital. He wants to use his experience to help other veterans who are in the same situation he was in. Really? Tommy nodded. If you take the job running the programs, I'd like to work with you. I know what it's like to be where those guys are. Maybe I can help them see that there's a way out. Rebecca looked at both of them. The general who had used her power and influence to fight for justice. and the veteran who had found his way back from the brink of despair. She thought about all the other veterans out there who might be struggling in silence, too proud or too scared to ask for help. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, I'll take the job." 6 months later, Rebecca stood in the newly opened Veterans Support Center at City General Hospital. The center had its own entrance, its own staff, and its own mission: to provide comprehensive care for veterans regardless of their housing situation, insurance status, or ability to pay. Tommy worked there too, as a peer counselor and outreach coordinator. He had his own apartment now and was taking classes to become a certified substance abuse counselor. But more importantly, he had reconnected with his sister and was rebuilding his relationship with his children. "Miss Chen?" A young veteran approached Rebecca's desk. He was thin and nervous, wearing clothes that had seen better days. "I heard you folks help veterans here?" Rebecca smiled and stood up. "Yes, we do. What's your name?" "Jake Peterson. I just got back from overseas and I'm having some trouble adjusting. My buddy Tommy said you might be able to help." "Jake, it's nice to meet you. Tommy's a good friend of mine. Why don't you have a seat and tell me what's going on?" As Jake began to tell his story, Rebecca reflected on how much had changed since that night when she first met Tommy. The hospital now had active programs for homeless veterans, mental health services, job training assistance, and transitional housing support. They had helped over 200 veterans in just 6 months. But the most important change wasn't in the programs or the policies. It was in the attitude. The hospital had remembered that sometimes the most important rule is the one that says, we should help people who need help, regardless of the bureaucratic complications. Foster was still the administrator, but he had learned some valuable lessons about leadership and priorities. He now made sure that the hospital's policies supported compassion rather than hindering it. General Williams visited regularly to check on the programs and to see her brother. She had become not just a supporter of the veteran services, but an advocate for healthcare workers who went above and beyond for their patients. And Rebecca? She had found her calling. Every day brought new challenges and new opportunities to make a difference in veterans' lives. She had learned that sometimes breaking the rules is exactly what you need to do to follow the most important rule of all. Treat people with dignity, compassion, and respect. The story of the nurse who was suspended for helping a homeless veteran had become something much bigger. It had become a story about the power of doing what's right even when it's difficult. It had become a story about how one act of kindness can create ripples that change entire systems. And most importantly, it had become a story about hope. Hope that there are still people in the world who care more about helping others than protecting themselves. As Rebecca watched Jake begin to relax and open up about his struggles, she smiled. This was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was supposed to be doing. And it had all started with a simple decision to help someone who needed help. Consequences be damned. Sometimes the best things in life happen when you stop worrying about the rules and start worrying about the people.